I wanted to begin by indicating my own personal fair and balanced, to use the Fox News term. I've known both Erica Corder, the woman who filed suit against Lewis Palmer, and Morgan Weinert, the woman that started the Gay Straight Alliance Monument, since they were both about 5 years old. So I figure I can probably come down fairly on both sides to a certain extent. I want to talk a little bit about how some in the Christian community got the idea that ACLU primarily was interested in, preserving the church-state barrier to such an extent that there was going to be no, expression of religion in the classroom, and how that misperception can be reconciled a little bit. And in doing so, I want to talk about the spectrum of school board officials and school administrators, most of whom fall in the more or less good camp, but as Christy alluded to and I said at the beginning, there are these kind of far outliers on either side. The one side we might talk about as the deliberate or explicit intent of those with a devout faith, usually Christian, not always, who run for school boards with an explicit intent in mind. And sometimes that intent is a little bit subtle, as we saw in District 11 a few years back. Some folks wouldn't call Eric Christensen so subtle, but in comparison to this new, more virulent strain we've seen in the last few years, I would call these the folks that want to publicly draw a line in the sand. I call them having the Sheriff Joe Arpaio of Phoenix disease, of saying, by God, I'm going to take on the ACLU and everybody else, and I don't really care what judicial precedent says. And they figure that the louder they shout that, the more votes they get. And yes, indeed, you get like the Texas School Board with its decisions on textbooks, which have a big impact, of course, outside the state of Texas. And you get a lot of local school districts, and not only the school districts, sometimes municipal officials, sometimes even elected judges, who say, by God, I'm going to keep that granite tablet with the Ten Commandments on my lawn no matter what any judge at any level says. I'm going to keep that prayer up in the school, no matter what anybody says. And, the first knee-jerk reaction when you hear that kind of thing is to say, litigate, litigate, litigate. But the funny thing is, number one, it can usually be taken care of rather quickly because the courts have already decided a lot of these issues. And the most recent example of that was probably the circuit court here in Denver overturning the Oklahoma citizen-sponsored end of Sharia law. They said, no, wait a minute, the way this is worded, this is utterly ridiculous. We don't care if this has been passed by 70% of the population. It's flatly illegal. You can't do that kind of thing. And then, of course, maybe it gets appealed. The Oklahoma Attorney General said he was going to enforce it anyway, no matter what the circuit court said. And so you get this kind of, very bad, vicious circle where a court's decision only causes the local official to dig in his or her heels further and get angrier with their talk. But of course, and I know that if there is a long line of judicial precedents, the only thing that ends up happening is that the school district or the city or county or state ends up spending money out the wazoo with no hope of really realizing anything more than perhaps a little wrinkle in the law. Because these people know they may be school administrators, they may be state legislators, they present a bill or they present a condition in the classroom that they know to be running afoul of the law, and they do so to create more of a constituency of absolutists who say, well, this is the way it ought to be, and so we're going to do it this way. And I think that the only thing we can do, litigate, litigate, litigate. Well, sure, it makes school districts spend money for court cases that they know they're going to lose, or cities, or counties. But at the end of the day, it would be so much more beneficial to say, educate, 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 to tell citizens that no, it doesn't, if the courts have clearly decided the parameters of something. There are many cases here in El Paso County and Douglas County vouchers, etc., where those parameters have not been clearly established, and so litigation makes a lot of sense. But if something is way outside those parameters, it doesn't make any good for citizens to support the real adamant advocacy, people that spend their days watching the Jim Cramer, Rush Limbaugh types of the world, to say, if I dig my heels in further, I'm going to get anywhere. And so I think because the ACLU spends a lot of time on this, it tends to be the thing that people pay attention to and think, oh, they just must not like it. You know, Teresa mentioned this case, the little town, Cranston, Rhode Island, which was a heavily Catholic community, where the atheist girl wanted the prayer removed. I agree with her, it was kind of a generic prayer, but the reaction of the community was what was kind of scary, because a Democratic state representative went on radio and called her an evil little thing for even bringing it. And, you know, it's like, once again, you spark people's emotions, and so they feel they have the right to say something that is way out of bounds, or to do things that are way out of bounds. I have a feeling that many states are going to attempt to pass these, no Sharia law type laws, that the courts have already said, no, this doesn't even come close to being legal, and states are going to try to do it anyway, because they've been, motivated into thinking they want to get Islam out of our community or something. But ACLU probably spends just as much time with the other set of problem children in school administration, and I would call those the ones that want to try as hard as they can to not offend anyone at any time. And in some senses, you almost feel sorry for these kind of administrators, because they have to face a level of parental invective nowadays that is far beyond what things were 20, 30, 50 years ago, where parents will come in and say, I believe my kid, even if you accuse him of armed robbery, half the school, because my kid doesn't do that kind of thing, and I'm going to sue everyone on the school board. And so, of course, administrators who have to face that often enough get very gun-shy, as it were, and don't want to offend anyone under any circumstances. But of course, the problem with that is that, to have a lively learning environment, you have to be able to talk about things on a personal basis and on a scholarly basis that some find controversial. And ACLU has pointed out time and time again to a lot of school districts, look, if you have a class on the history of Judaism, on Jesus is an historical figure, as Muhammad is an historical figure, there's nothing wrong with that. That should be encouraged, provided the teacher isn't proselytizing, because kids do need to learn, the history of different faiths and all this. That's why the ACLU brought the case about the lockers, and has also defended the meet me at the pole type of prayer sessions that take place outside of school grounds, because we want to make sure that administrators understand that if they try to make the classroom as safe as possible, they end up pleasing no one, because no one feels comfortable in saying anything whatsoever. And both Teresa and Christy pointed out the real touchy problem area here of ridicule and intimidation. And ACLU, when we see a bill crafted very well for things like bullying and hate speech, we can support those kind of notions. And some ACLU members say, hey, wait a minute. Anytime you're getting into an area of defining bullying or defining hate speech, you're limiting freedom of speech. Well, you know what? When real intimidation of real people is involved, this is something that has to be addressed by the school district. So yes, allow those expressions of faith to take place, but also keep your eyes open for what is bullying and make sure that teachers know they should act upon it. Then the open question becomes, how do you deal with people's different levels of sensitivities? Because what might be bullying to some might be someone just talking trash, to other people. And I think the issue becomes when it's a continuous pattern of harassment because someone tries to have a representation of their faith, rosary, headwear, whatnot, that if that pattern is established, that's the kind of bullying that needs to be stopped. The problem, of course, is that the more a school tries to get into that as an issue of faith, the closer we get to the model of France. And I don't think any of us want to see the U.S. go down the path of France of saying, you cannot wear a crucifix in school, you cannot wear a rosary, you cannot wear, if you're a woman, you may not wear any form of Islamic headgear. I would say that since those laws were passed in France, tensions and friction among groups has increased drastically. That has not solved any kind of problem. And to make believe that that kind of approach solves anything is a very big mistake. In those kind of cases on this other extreme, often administrators will prove more willing to say, oh, okay, if it's really okay that I have a class on Jesus' years as a teacher, blah, 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 something like that, then that's fine. If it's okay if I allow this after-school class or this prayer by the flagpole, that's fine. They don't tend to be the ones that go to the edge in defending their own rights to prevent religious expression in the schools. But it is still something that the ACLU has to concentrate on and look at as closely as those adamant, devout type school district types. And so far, I think that most school districts in most regions are trying to strike that fair balance. The difficulties come in precisely those areas of private intimidation and private bullying and how you define the bullying laws of the future and how that interacts with free speech and freedom of religion. Now, I did want to end with one little item, since Teresa began with football, and since it's our most contentious national religion, I thought I'd end with football as well, because there's an interesting issue coming out that probably is not litigable, but is causing a lot of friction between public and parochial schools, and that is this new issue of private religious schools cherry-picking students, first for magnet school type of opportunities, but later for sports scholarships. And the most upfront example of this that the Denver Post did a multi-part series on last October was Valor Christian High School, which has ended up on the top of the list every year, with just this outrageously great team. And the public school coaches were griping about it in the Denver Post a few months ago, but just a couple weeks ago, Colorado Springs went a step further by having Valor Christian officially frozen out of the football league in the city. Now, you can look at this and say, private universities are able to appeal to individual students against state, funded universities, so why can't this be true on a public school level? And the public school folks will say, yeah, there's some unfair advantages in money and backing being played here. And I think that it could even get down to a situation where, the ACLU might be inclined at first to take the side of the public school, but if more and more public schools start trying to freeze out Valor Christian from any involvement in any leagues in Colorado Springs, it could end up that ACLU ended up defending Valor Christian for its right to cherry-pick students. And because football is, like I said, one of the most contentious issues of our time, we'll probably find issues other than Tim Tebow to rant and rave about, number one being Valor Christian High School. And that's all I had to say, and so I thought now we'd open up for any of your questions or comments.
I have a question. The morning that I transferred my daughter